Welcome back to the Connected podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you an extraordinary collection in which some incredible students take the driver's seat and host dynamic conversations with professionals from across the higher education sector, discussing the vital topic of student belonging. In our next episode, Gem Standen talks to three wonderful people from the University of Leeds. Gem is joined by Dr Ben Chong, a lecturer from the School of Electronic and Electrical Engineering, Dr Richard de Blacquière-Clarkson, an academic development consultant and the strategic lead for research ethics at the Leeds Institute of Teaching Excellence, and finally, Dr Manjo Ravi, lecturer in chemical engineering and the programme lead for the undergraduate and the integrated master's chemical engineering programme.
What is your project that you're here to talk to us about today, please?
Okay, so our project was a piece of research we did, which was funded by CEDA, the Staff Educational Developers Association, looking at sense of belonging amongst international students here in the UK. We specifically focused in on international students in the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences, and looking at not just trying to understand their views, but actually take a partnership approach where we would work together with them as not as equals, because you can never get rid of those power imbalances, but on a relatively equitable basis, to both explore their perspectives and also co-design a research instrument which could then be used more widely to get a breadth of perspective.
Fantastic, thank you very, very much. So what made you want to focus specifically on international student sense of belonging?
Yeah, thanks, Gemma, for that. I think a couple of things. But when we were sort of putting our heads together, thinking about the remit of the project initially and trying to, scope out the remit of the project, a couple of things really stood out for us. It was the period where we were seeing that HE was bringing in a lot of principles about EDI and how do we have more diversity and inclusive practice across the breadth of higher education. So that was certainly one of the motivations. But when we looked through the pedagogic literature and also more broadly across policy documents, be it at Russell Group universities or otherwise, we felt while EDI was being increasingly embraced, one of the things which was probably, in our opinion, not standing out as much was the international student community and how their needs would potentially have to be addressed. So we did feel that there was a bit of a gap that needed to be addressed. And kind of looking at that further in the context, particularly of students within engineering and physical sciences, is not least because, well, the two of us academics on this project are working in the Faculty of Engineering and Physical Sciences, but beyond our own individual affiliations, it was also the fact that, again, in the literature, we probably thought that there was a greater skew of such investigations of sense of belonging and student voice in the non-STEM subjects, if I can call them, as opposed to, say, STEM subjects. So that was, again, an incentive for us to look at this.
Fantastic. Ben?
So I just have another point to add. It's more of a personal reason why I want to focus on international students. So I was an international student of this university and of this faculty as well. So I could empathize what our students are experiencing. So therefore, I would like to focus on them and work with them. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And that lived experience really does make all the difference, doesn't it, in terms of your level of approach with students that come from similar backgrounds, especially. Is there anything you'd like to add as well there, Rich?
No, I think we covered it nicely.
Yeah, brilliant. So why did you choose to involve students as partners in the research rather than just as participants?
Shall I start with this one? I think I'm quite pragmatic when it comes to educational practice. I'm quite interested in what tends to get the results, and I've been doing student partnership work for a lot of years educationally, and it done well, it gets you the results that you want in terms of the impact on students, particularly if you want better understanding, if you want to produce outputs with greater validity that are more relevant to students' lived experience, then doing something to them as opposed to doing something meaningfully with them is a very, very different dynamic and will get you very different results as well. And in that context, I was very interested in having worked with inclusion and with kind of minoritized students in different contexts. I thought it'd be quite interesting to take that practice and apply it to international students, which was an area where I had quite limited experience.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just jump in on that as well to add to what Rich has just mentioned. In terms of, again, the ultimate objective was to design a survey instrument and kind of collect data from international students across the university for what can be done to potentially improve their student experience. But again, when we thought of it, if we were just sitting down as academics or as education consultants and coming up with this survey, there's a sense of trying to preempt what these issues are, which we felt would have not been a potentially authentic way of going about designing the survey instrument, which is where we start. We want to have students as research participants, co-creation, that sense of co-creation with them, and then kind of use that to collect data on a larger scale.
Brilliant, thank you so much. What was it like working with a group of international students to co-design a survey? How did their insights shape the types of questions that you asked?
Can I invert the question? And I think because we took a partnership approach, they weren't shaping the questions, we were shaping their questions. So they didn't shape the questions, they defined the questions and they defined the topics. And then we worked with them to refine them a little bit, to use a little bit of kind of methodology and survey design to tweak them. But I think they didn't shape the questions, they set the questions, they created the questions, and then we kind of contributed to that, rather than a more traditional model where perhaps we would create the questions and then we'd take them to students for some feedback and they'd tweak some of the details.
Excellent. That sounds like a really interesting approach to take. And how did you find the students responded to that? Did they need a lot of coaching to get there, or was it a little bit more fluid?
I don't want to dominate this. Shall I answer that one as well? So a really key element of this was because we hired them as interns. We spent a number of weeks talking about building up a sense of community ties, that kind of like bonding within the group, to be able to have these conversations with a degree of comfort. So the first meeting was a bit awkward, in fact, because as you kind of would expect it to be, but over a number of weeks built up more of a rapport, talking about and sharing experiences. So when we then moved on to saying, well, what are the things we want to ask and talk about, that flowed quite nicely. What they then needed a bit more support with was, as a group of engineering students, they weren't particularly familiar with designing what's effectively a social sciences research instrument, which is entirely fair, because why would they be? So there was a little bit more there in terms of taking them through, all right, we've got a bunch of topics, a bunch of questions, how do we kind of refine this into a neat survey? But I think that's exactly what you'd expect, given the makeup of the groups and their experiences.
Okay, that's interesting. And for the academic team, were there any things that the students raised that surprised you, or potentially shifted the direction of the research? So, yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't think there's I think there's not so much on the curriculum and the content of the programs that we're delivering. In fact, it is their life around the life in Leeds, life around around Leeds, and the system that facilitates us. It's facilitated the degree programs. I think that's what. Most of the topics are around these areas rather than the academic content, which actually which was a surprise to us anyway, because we thought they would talk more about their degree programs or the things that they learned. So yeah, so I'm not sure about my colleagues, what they feel about that.
No, you stole my point, Ben. Yeah, that was probably where I was coming to as well, saying initially my sort of, again, expectation or assumption, which would have been exactly to kind of pick up on my earlier point, it would have been a mistake to kind of design the survey, say, on my own, where I would have probably given a greater section of the survey dedicated to academic-based questions. And eventually, when we looked at what the students came up with, not to say that there was no academic stuff there, but then it was a much smaller proportion than what I would have envisaged at the start. So yeah, that was certainly something there, but also more in terms of when we had these discussions that Rich was talking about. Initially, it's sort of building that safe space where they could listen to each other, empathize with each other, and come up, eventually build their way towards designing the survey. A lot of the things around cost of living and also how it links in with employability and aspects like those really surfaced a number of times. And that kind of, was reassuring for us to say, these are things that we need to think about as well in terms of going forward as an institution.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Ben.
Yeah, I just want to say as well, because international, things or interests or things that international students are concerned about are changing every year or even every month, especially like for instance, student visa, employability, and so on and so forth. And it's completely different from my time or from Manoj's time as well, because 20 years ago it was different from this year. So it's actually, so whatever the race is what's happening at the moment. So that is really, really important to focus on.
Completely agree. I think you've answered this just in the last question. In your conversations, what stood out as the key challenges that international students face in feeling they belong? Obviously, you say it's not necessarily relating to the degree programme, but some of the things around sort of adjusting to life in the UK, the language, the work or limitations therefore to working. Were there any sort of really poignant themes that came out from your experience and the conversations thereafter as well?
I think something came out quite clear for me, which I certainly wasn't surprised by, but I think it did come out very clearly, was that just the talking through the lived experience of what it's like to have all the challenges of coming and studying at university anyway, and on top of that, a whole host of extra ones, even just down to arriving and not knowing how anything works. The public transport, the banking systems may be subtly different, that there's an awful lot of things that they're very capable of getting their heads around, but it's a lot all at the same time, whilst simultaneously engaging in getting their heads around university processes and structures. And that we don't always make any allowance for this. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but sometimes it's just, well, they've got a load extra and they've just got to find ways without us necessarily doing a lot to kind of ease that transition for them.
That's interesting. Did any of the students talk about some of the smaller things that made a big difference in helping them feel welcomed or seen?
Can I answer? Yeah. I thought actually there's an idea. I always remember that the idea of surfacing the cultural diversity in our faculty was really great and inspiring, because I think what they were saying that within the faculty, or to a certain extent within the university, there was not much of culture exhibition or demonstration that we have we have a lot of people from around the world, cultures from around the world, and we don't really show that. So for instance, like there are festivals, any kind of festivals throughout the year. So they don't really invite other students to join in, and that kind of, actually it is an idea which I actually would like to consider to have in my school. So so I really like that kind of idea. So it's not just problems or issues that they highlight, but sometimes they give us some suggestions what we need to do in this area. Yeah,
I love that. And that sort of intrinsic sort of culture sharing as a home student, that was really eye-opening for me. I didn't move far to go to university, and actually having students from different parts of the world was massively inspiring to take part in different ceremonies, learning about cultures, and also learn about the differences in I mean, I studied media, and as an undergraduate, like learning how media is reported in other people's home countries was really, really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. How did you make sure your survey reflected the realities of the international students' lives, not just sort of basing it on assumptions?
Yeah, I think that's where the sense of co-creating the survey and pretty much working on possibly I'd argue the highest possible step of the ladder in terms of student partnership, because the onus was pretty much on them. And I think, as Rich mentioned earlier, it's one of the questions. There was a bit of open-endedness and vagueness about it at the start, to the extent that probably students felt a bit uncomfortable because they were not clear what the final destination was. But then come towards the end, they kind of really realized the value of those, the number of different activities that we run to build that safe space. And eventually it was very much their questions, their themes. They could dictate, which questions went into the final survey, because they did some kind of blue sky thinking, and then they had to narrow down because, well, they could not end up with a survey which was going to take 2 hours to complete. So the onus was very much on them. And I think that's why it ended up being a very authentic piece of work.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really fantastic. Before I move on to the next question, any other comments on that point before we move on?
No, I think I agree with Manoj entirely. I think it's that partnership approach is really key to this, and without that, you're going to struggle to have real authenticity.
I agree. I completely agree with you. So, what do you hope the survey will support other universities to learn or do better when it comes to supporting their own international students?
I think a couple of things, if I go first. I think one is the outputs and the results of the survey as such, but I think sort of more broadly, what I'd be keen for universities and for individuals across universities who can enable change is to look at students as change agents and kind of look at that methodology of really building a safe space and working with students where you're not just using them as part of, say, curriculum design or assessment design, which is very, very different from something like this, where you want to, tap into the lived experience. Then that requires investing time, effort, energy into building that safe space, which is extremely important. It's not just making them feel comfortable, but it's also giving them the assurance that, we hear you and we're thinking about, how we could proactively foster an environment where you can thrive. So I think that's where we need to work towards, is within HE broadly. And in terms of the survey, of course, then that what I look at is the kind of the co-creation and working with students is the macro level of change. And then the micro level is what the details from, something like a survey results and the analysis of that will tell us, saying what are the specific things that we could work on. So one of the things that came up for us locally when having these conversations in our focus group with our students was about culture. And I was very, very, it was a mind-opening conversation for me, because culture is a word which can be interpreted in many ways. And we kind of had this word association exercise where we told students, well, here are a list of different words. Just tell us whether you've had a positive experience or a negative or a neutral experience with the word, right? And one of the words was culture. And it was very interesting to see how it was interpreted in different ways. So it could have just been the culture within the university or culture within their society, or more broadly, the UK culture as well. But also linking back to how they were not, as individuals, integrating themselves within the society, but it was more retaining their individualistic traits, but seeing how they interact, with the prevailing culture, if you like. So, and I think that's where the real sort of sense of belonging comes from. You do not want them to lose their individuality and become somebody else because, they've embarked on this educational journey in the UK. You want them to still retain all those individual characteristics, but of course, evolve with, whatever the culture is, broadly speaking, and kind of learn from it and improve the culture overall. So yeah, those are things that I think we could look at as far as institution-wise, both in terms of working with students and in terms of what their requirements are.
I think that's a really poignant message, particularly for HE providers holistically, to be honest. Brilliant, thank you so much. From a student perspective, what do you think made this feel like a real partnership rather than a token gesture? How did you sort of gain the buy-in from your students who took part?
I think one really key aspect of it from the beginning was the positioning of expertise in the room, and a significant amount of that expertise resided with those students. And again, this comes back to it's never a position of equality, but a position of a recognition of the contributions everyone's making. So Ben and Manjo talked about being international students in the past, but the context has changed. In some ways, it made it easy for me to be the naive person in the room because I have no experience of international study. I'm British. I studied in Britain, and I think that positioning from the start, saying, look, we're all coming here with expertise that we're bringing to this project and we're bringing into this room, including them, and they are bringing understanding and they're bringing experiences and insights that we simply do not have. And that's part of what we're paying them for, is because what they're bringing has real value, and we're appreciating that. And I think that really helped things get off onto a good start in terms of saying this is a partnership. We're not asking you to do things we could have done ourselves.
That's fantastic. And again, I think it's like I said at the beginning, that sort of lived experience quite often is really supported by students, as well as a mature student myself and a member of staff. I know that the mature students at UEA often feel quite comfortable in speaking to me because I know what they're talking about. So I can completely appreciate that entirely. What advice would you give to other staff who want to involve students meaningfully in research like this? Who wants to go first?
Ben, you go.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I can go first. If it's not enough, you can add more. Anyway, I think in this context, I think we really need to listen actively, and also back to the previous question that you had. I think we also need to give chance to I wouldn't say marginalize, but then give chance to everyone to speak, and then try to get everyone to contribute, and do anticipate the unexpected, because I think this group of students, or students in general, they may have their own personality, they may have different personality, and because of the group dynamics, because in a group of students, amongst themselves, they do not know each other very well, and therefore you need to anticipate something that you have not expected, and be adaptive. So the way we do our research must be adapted according to the students, according to the participants. Yeah. I'm not sure about whether there is any other advice from from two colleagues here.
I think this ties in very much to what you said about adapt and expect the unexpected. But I think partnership work is necessarily somewhat messy, and it's going to feel the most messy right in the middle. We were quite fortunate in that our plans did more or less followed. Nothing radically got derailed. We didn't have to have a big rethink. But after every session working together with the students, we had to go away and go, okay, so now that's happened, and this, we couldn't have predicted exactly what they said and how and what happened. So you have to go away and say, okay, well, that was the plan, and now we've actually had this interaction. We have to revisit the plan and reorganize it a little bit. And yeah, somewhere around the middle, we're like, okay, this is going to work, but it gets increasingly messy, and then it comes together again at the end. So there's an element of trust the process with this, and just and depending on your discipline and depending on your background, it may feel a little bit countercultural in doing so.
That's interesting. Fantastic advice as well from both of you there. Is there anything that you'd like to add there, Manjo? No?
I think they've done a good job.
Yeah,
there.
they really have. Yeah,
it's just about don't walk in with any preconceived notions, which is what Ben said. Go in there with an open mind, and be ready to feel uncomfortable and take that in your stride. As Rich said, the methodology might feel messy at times, but then trust the process.
Fantastic advice. And before we draw to a close today, I wondered if there's anything that you'd like to add. I know that you guys have published your research on this. Is there anything that you'd like to say about that for any listeners that might be interested in looking further into your project and how to sort of essentially replicate it in their own institution?
Rich, you're the best to talk about that.
Well, the short version is please do and let us know how it goes. The intention behind the paper is that it is, although we do present some of the findings from the research, it is primarily methodological. The intention is to say, well, look, if you're interested in doing a piece of partnership work with students, whether it's international students or any group of people, here is a methodology that you could use or adapt. We've applied it. It has worked successfully for us. You might like to kind of draw on this. And you can have it wholesale and just go out and do it exactly the way you guys did it, or you can kind of look at it and say, "Oh, I'll take some pieces off that, but I'm not going to do it quite the way you did."
We can't then trust the process, Rich.
Well, yeah,
you've got to trust your process.
You certainly can. You certainly can.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, no. But yeah, is there anything else that you guys would like to add to what we've covered today?
I think perhaps we need to acknowledge our funder, CEDA. Yeah. So this way we get our funding to pay our students time and the other thing, maybe a little advice to buy some refreshment for them. Cakes and drinks for them. So yeah.
And I think it's sorry, Ben, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no,
but I think it's a really important point. I mean, Manoj earlier talked about kind of investment. There is a financial investment involved, and the students are producing something of genuine value to us and to our employer. So it's only right that they are paid. But at the same time, it's not free, but it is actually very, very good value for money. It's not that expensive to put some students in a room for a number of hours, maybe buy them coffee and a few biscuits. In terms of research, what research costs, you get tremendous returns on that investment.
Excellent. No, that's fantastic advice. And thank you guys so much for your time today, sharing your experience and details of your project. It's been really interesting to hear more about it. And I'm really interested to also hear if anyone else uses your methodology as well. So do keep us informed. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gemma. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks very much, Gemma. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Connected podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out the rest of our extraordinary Voices of Belonging collection and stay connected.